So welcome back, friends. This is Dr. Sangram Patil. This video is a part 2 of Control and Coordination chapter of Year 10 CBSE book. For part 1, please follow the link on the channel, and this is part 2. In part 1, we've talked about the reflex arc, reflex actions, and in this part we'll be talking about human brain, and the part 3 will be about control and coordination in the plants. So human brain is a part of central nervous system along with a spinal cord. So central nervous system consists of brain and spinal cord. We have peripheral nervous system that includes the nerves that come off the brain and the spinal cord, and they go into the periphery, so they are peripheral nervous system. And we have an autonomic nervous system that is in relation to the autonomic functions, involuntary functions inside the body. So let's go through the brain structures. So brain is a part of central nervous system, and it deals with thinking, the complex mechanisms and neuronal connections that lead to decision making, memory, control and coordination of various body movements, voluntary and involuntary functions of the body, various reflex actions that are involved in involuntary functioning. They are controlled through various parts of the brain. And imagine the work, the activities like writing, talking, moving a chair, clapping at the end of the program. These are voluntary actions, and the brain sends signals to the muscles to perform these actions. So this is the second way in which the nervous system communicates with the muscles. The first way we have seen. It involves the spinal arc, the reflex arc, and the reflex arc is the faster acting. We've seen that in the previous lecture, that it's the quicker way of getting information from the danger site through sensory neuron that passes information to the relay neuron and then on to motor neuron that orders the muscles to take action, contraction, and that moves you away from the danger. So that's one way of sending information to the muscles. The second way is through the brain complex processes, the thinking and decision making apparatus, then going back to the muscles for various actions. The communication between central nervous system and other body parts takes place through the peripheral nervous system that consists of cranial nerves and spinal nerves. So the cranial nerves, they come out of the brain, and the spinal nerves, they come out of the spinal cord that extends from the medulla onwards. So the spinal nerves, they come out of the spinal cord, and that's how the central nervous system communicates with the rest of the body, through cranial nerves and spinal nerves. Okay, the brain allows us to think and take actions based on thinking. So this is quite complex design, complex neuronal network required for integrating, receiving this information from periphery, integrating the information, and then providing the output to the muscles for actions. And to do this, the brain has got 3 major parts. They are forebrain, as shown in this diagram, the midbrain, and the hindbrain. So let's look into little bit details of forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. The name itself suggests their location. The fore means the one that is in the front, mid is in the middle, and hind is that is behind in the location. Now these regions, they receive impulses from various receptors. Okay, so remember your receptors. The receptors are the specialized nerve endings, and they bring information from various sense organs, sense organs, to the central nervous system, and the sense organ ends are called receptors. We've seen that in the previous lecture. Okay, So separate areas of the forebrain are specialized for hearing, smell, sight, and so on. There are separate areas of association where this sensory information that comes to the brain is interpreted by putting it together with the information from other receptors and the information that is already stored in the brain. So the information that comes to the brain from one part is integrated to the information that comes from the other part, and it is also combined with the information that is stored, okay, so that is in the memory of the brain, and that all is integrated together to make a decision, okay. And then once the decision is made, it is used to action the effector neuron, the motor neuron, such as in case of, say, this light reflex, there is a motor neuron, so there is a motor neuron for other actions as well, okay. So certain sensations are distinct, such as seeing or hearing. There are one type of sensations, but there are sensations for hunger, okay, whether we have eaten or not, and they'll make you feel hungry. When your stomach is full, they'll give that signal to you that your hunger is now gone. So they are called satiety centers in the brain, and these separate functions are done by the areas in the forebrain, okay. So these associated centers lie in the forebrain, separate parts of the forebrain. Now the next part is they want you to study different parts of the brain in the diagram that is labeled and that's given in the book. So we'll go through different parts of the brain. So we got forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. The forebrain has got different parts. The most important part you should know is cerebral cortex, okay. So cerebral cortex. So this outer layer of the brain, okay, of the forebrain is called cerebral cortex, and it's a very important, most important layer of the brain, okay. Now inside the cerebral cortex there is a cingulate gyrus, okay. So this is a cingulate gyrus. Now underneath the cingulate gyrus there is a corpus callosum that connects the two halves of the brain. So right half and left half of the brain is connected through this corpus callosum, okay. And then there are parts of the forebrain, they are called as limbic system. Limbic system is very important system that carries out lots of involuntary functions of the body, and the parts are thalamus, hypothalamus, amygdala, and hippocampus, okay. You don't need to remember these four names, just understand that forebrain has got a cerebral cortex, has got a cingulate gyrus, has a central connection of the neurons that is called as corpus callosum. It connects right half with the left half of the forebrain, and there is a part called limbic system which has got different parts, okay. Thalamus, hypothalamus, amygdala, and hippocampus are the parts of limbic system, okay. And again I'm telling you, you don't need to remember these detailed parts of the limbic system, okay. So that are the forebrain parts, okay. Now the midbrain is a very important structure. So if you look at this forebrain, the midbrain and the hindbrain, okay, this part, mid and hindbrain, they are in a single column fashion, okay, in the fashion of a column. So midbrain, so thalamus I have described. Thalamus is a part of forebrain. Underneath the thalamus starts the midbrain, okay, And again, you don't need to know the parts of this midbrain in details like superior colliculus, inferior collicus, tectum and tegmentum. So these are the parts of midbrain, but you don't need to know them in detail for year 10. And there is a hindbrain. Hindbrain consists of three main structures: the pons, okay, medulla and cerebellum. Remember, these are very important structures in control and coordination of various voluntary and involuntary actions in the body. The medulla extends into the spine as a spinal cord. So central nervous system has got two parts, brain and spinal cord. Forebrain, midbrain and hindbrain. Okay, hindbrain has pons, medulla and cerebellum. Medulla continues as spinal cord. So these are the different parts you should be aware of. Now let's have a look at different functions. Okay, different functions, different activities. Now, mouth waters when we see food. Okay, our heart beats without we thinking of it, and we have no conscious control by just thinking about heartbeat. Okay, we don't have to remember to breathe. We don't have to concentrate on how the food is digested in our stomach. Do we have to? No. These things happen involuntarily. Okay, so we are going to look into these functions in little bit detail and how they are carried out without any thinking, without voluntary control. But let's have a look at more specific parts of the brain and find out their function, because that's the activity described in your book, functions of different parts. So that's the diagram given in your book. So that shows forebrain, okay, midbrain and hindbrain. Remember, this all is a forebrain, okay. So this is a midbrain and that's a hindbrain, and hindbrain has three parts: pons, medulla and cerebellum. Medulla continues as spinal cord, okay. Thalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary gland, hippocampus, amygdala are part of forebrain. They're part of limbic system as well, as you might remember. So let's go through different functions. So depending on the location of the lobe in the forebrain again is divided into frontal lobe, parietal lobe, occipital lobe and temporal lobe. Okay, and we have the midbrain that lies inside at the top here. We can't see it here, but it continues as a column of pons, medulla, spinal cord, and there is a cerebellum. So let's have a look at the functions of these structures. So temporal lobe works for problem solving, emotional activities, judgment, okay, making a judgment, making a reasoning, speaking, so our speech is controlled here, and voluntary motor activity. Remember, the important part of the forebrain is the cerebral cortex, that is the covering of this brain area, okay. So that's the frontal lobe. Now parietal lobe, differentiation between right from left, feeling the sensations that come from different body parts, reading, orientation of different body parts. That's the function of parietal lobe. Now occipital lobe, vision, color perception, and temporal lobe, understanding of the language, behavior, memory and hearing. So these are the functions of temporal lobe. Now brainstem, is actually made up of three structures: the midbrain, pons, and medulla. So that functions for breathing, control of body temperature, control of digestion, sleep wakefulness cycle, and control of swallowing. So lots of non-voluntary, involuntary functions of the body are controlled by brainstem. Now cerebellum is important in balance, in coordination and control of voluntary movement, and in fine muscle control. So if the cerebellum gets affected by any disease, people lose balance, they lose control and coordination of voluntary movement, and they also lose fine muscle movements. Okay, so these are the functions of various parts of the brain. We'll have a little more detailed look at brainstem function. So brainstem is located between cerebrum, that is forebrain. The forebrain is also called as cerebrum, and the spinal cord. So it consists of midbrain, pons, and medulla. Remember, the complete name of medulla is medulla oblongata. Okay, medulla oblongata. The functions of the brainstem we have seen: it serves as a conduit for ascending nerve tracts and descending nerve tracts that connect the spinal cord to the other parts of the forebrain. So it lies between the forebrain and the spinal cord. So it acts as a pathway for ascending and descending nerve tracts between spinal cord and forebrain. It contains important reflex centers that control breathing, cardiovascular system, temperature, and control of consciousness. And it contains the important nuclei of the cranial nerves. Remember, there are 12 cranial nerves, and the nuclei of 10 cranial nerves lie in the brainstem, that is midbrain, pons, medulla. Remember, midbrain is a separate structure. Pons, medulla, and cerebellum are part of hindbrain. Okay, but when brainstem is considered, midbrain, pons, medulla come together. Now that's about different structures. That was the activity your book wants you to do, the 10th CBSE book. Now let us look at the word reflex again. Okay, we've seen in last video on control coordination chapter that reflex word is used when you act without thinking, you act quickly. So like mouth watering or heart beating or digestion, we're not in control of these activities. We don't have to remember to breathe or digest. These are the involuntary activities. Okay, so the simple reflex actions like pupil size and the thought out actions like moving a chair, there is another set of muscle movements over which we do not have any thoughtful control, and many of these involuntary actions are controlled by brainstem, that is midbrain as well as hindbrain, and hindbrain also includes cerebellum. All these involuntary actions. Okay, so we are going to talk about involuntary actions now, that involve control of blood pressure, control of salivation, control of vomiting, are controlled by medulla. Okay, remember, medulla is a part of hindbrain and brainstem. Now think of the activities like walking in a straight line, riding a bicycle, or picking a pencil. These are due to the hindbrain structure called cerebellum. Okay, so cerebellum controls these activities. So that's the hindbrain, and this flower-like structure at the back is called as cerebellum. Remember, it used to be called as small brain. Okay, so but it is not called small brain nowadays. So cerebellum controls all these activities, and it is responsible for precision of voluntary actions and maintaining the posture and balance of the body. So if these actions don't happen, then it is difficult for that person to balance, to conduct fine motor activities, or to carry out the controlled activities. So many of these are controlled by midbrain and hindbrain. Okay, now the slight difference between involuntary actions and reflex actions is the reflex actions are involuntary as well. We do not have thoughtful control of them. The involuntary actions, they are carried out without any control, without any thinking, but they are ongoing activities for maintenance of body function like breathing, heart beating, digestion, whereas reflex actions are protective like light reflex, sneezing, coughing. So that's a slight difference between involuntary and reflex action. Some functions are performed such as breathing, digestion, heart beating, eye reflexes, but some involuntary actions have voluntary control to certain extent. Okay, examples are breathing. You can control your breathing a little bit. Salivation, you can control your salivation by different movements inside in the mouth, or by swallowing your saliva, or putting some kind of food, or seeing the food. You can control salivation. Swallowing, deglutition, it is supposed to be a involuntary action. You don't need any thinking for that. It happens automatically, but you can control it if you want to. Defecation is involuntary. It's an involuntary reflex, but you can control it. You control it till you find a place for defecation, that is going to toilet. Micturition, similar to defecation, you control it, though it's a reflex. So some functions are involuntary, like breathing, digestion, heart beating, eye reflexes, where you cannot, you do not have voluntary awareness of them. They are involuntary, but you can still control some of them. Okay, so that's a little bit extra. That's not mentioned in your CBSE book, but I've just tried to go in a little bit extra just to make you understand more. Now, mouth waters when we see a food. Pupil size changes with light intensity. That's called light reflex. Many are controlled by midbrain and hindbrain. Many of these activities. All these involuntary actions, including blood pressure, salivation, vomiting, are controlled by medulla in hindbrain. Okay. Now, little bit about cerebellum. So, cerebellum we have seen already that it's important in posture, balance, and precision of voluntary actions. Okay, so we'll have a look at how the cerebellum control works. So the information from periphery, such as through eye, vision, through ears, auditory input, or through the skin, muscle, and joints, you get somatosensory input. Okay, so this information is carried to the brain by sensory nerves, and then in the brain, the cerebellum, which is a part of hindbrain, uses this information to make postural and balance activities. They are called postural and balance reflexes. So you can maintain your correct posture, you maintain your balance, and you maintain your fine motor activities. So that's the function of cerebellum. That's how it works. Now, how are the tissues of nervous system, the central nervous system, are protected? So if you look at brain and spinal cord, that's in the laboratory, that's in the dissection hall, everything opened up, dissected. So they are very delicate structures, soft, okay? But they don't lie within our body like this. So if you look at bare brain and the spinal cord, they'll be like this, the part of central nervous system, but they are actually protected in the body in skull, inside the skull, that is a bony skull. The brain lies in the bony skull, and the spinal cord lies in the bony spine, that's a vertebral canal, vertebral column. Okay, so they are well protected, but they're just not protected by, not just by bone, but there are various layers, the coverings of fibrous tissue, tough fibrous membranes. So if you look at this, is now, you don't need to know for your year 10 into great details of this. This is just for your extra understanding. If you cut the section of the skull here, that will show you skin of the scalp. Okay, scalp is the skin of the head. Then you have a periosteum, that is the covering of the bone, then bone of the skull, and there are three tough membranes that cover the brain, that is dura mater, arachnoid matter, and pia mater. Okay, same membranes cover the spinal cord as well. So spinal cord, you have dura, arachnoid, and pia mater, and then inside is a spinal cord. Okay, so between arachnoid and pia mater, there is a fluid called as CSF. Okay, cerebrospinal fluid. Cerebrospinal fluid, CSF. Okay, and this CSF, along with these membranes, this forms a fluid filled balloon that lies between the spinal cord, brain, and the bony structures outside. So it's a fluid filled balloon. It protects the central nervous system from shocks. So it acts as a shock absorber. Okay, so that's how skull and vertebral column, they help brain and spinal cord. Now, how does nervous tissue cause actions? How does it make the muscles work? How does it make the glands work? Let's go into little bit details of these. Now, we've seen how reflex arc works. So reflex arc will get the sensory signal to the spinal cord level. Then relay neuron will send this information to the motor neuron, the output neuron, and the output neuron will order the muscles to contract. That's how the action will be taken. Now, what happens at the basic level? How does this action actually comes into place, comes into force? So the nerves, they collect information, okay, from the internal environment or the external environment of the body. The nerves that carry internal information are sensory neurons of the autonomic nervous system. The nerves that carry information from external environment are the sensory neurons of the somatic nervous system. So these autonomic and somatic sensory neurons, they carry information to the brain, to the central nervous system. Then central nervous system sends the orders after integrating this information and making a decision after thinking. It sends orders to the motor neurons. So these are the outlay neurons. So they are output neurons sending the signals for actions. Now, what happens in somatic nervous system? Okay, so autonomic nervous system deals with the respiration, heart beating, digestion, various hormones, and other actions. The somatic nervous system deals with the muscle action mainly, okay, to make it simple. Now, somatic nervous system, as you can see, the information is conducted from periphery by the nerve to the brain. So that is the part of the brain that receives information, that is cerebral cortex. Okay, I've told you this is a forebrain. It is also called as cerebrum, and the cortex is the outermost layer of the cerebrum. So it is also called as cerebral cortex. That's the extra information for you. Now it does a processing of this information. It integrates it with information from other parts, also uses the existing stored information in the brain and makes a decision and sends the orders to the output neurons, and they cause actions. So when the output neurons they land on the effector organ. So effector organ means the organ that is going to show the effect, the organ that will take action. So these nerves, when they land on, say this is a muscle fiber, okay, so here muscle is an effective organ. If this is a gland, then gland is an effective organ. So there is a junction between these nerve tips and the effective organ. So muscle cells have got special proteins that change the shape and the arrangement inside the cell in response to the nervous electrical impulse that comes along the nerve fiber. Okay, so the electrical impulse that comes along the nerve fiber, it is transmitted to the muscle at the neuromuscular junction, and this impulse then produces changes in the shape and arrangement of the special proteins in the muscle. When this happens, new arrangement of these proteins gives muscle cells a shorter form. So muscles shorten with after the nerve impulse comes, so they contract, and that's how they perform the action. So I'll show you this in more details here. So the nerve impulse, electrical impulse, is coming from the brain or spinal cord. This is a neuromuscular junction. Okay, so the electrical impulse causes the release of chemicals at the neuromuscular junction. These chemicals convey the information to the muscle fiber, and muscle fiber has got special proteins. Now what are these proteins? So remember, there are two main types of proteins. The thin the structures here, the threads, are called actin, and the thick portion, the thick structures, are called myosin. So actin and myosin, these are the two main structures. So when the nerve impulse arrives, the electrical impulse arrives at neuromuscular junction, it transmits information to the muscle, and then there is a contraction of the there is a change in the protein structure. They change the shape and they've changed the arrangement. Okay, so there is a change in shape and there is a change in arrangement of these special proteins in the muscle that contracts the muscle. So there is a contraction of the muscle fiber. Now this combination of myosin actin is also called here as a sarcomere. So sarcomere is this single unit where actin and muscle myosin, they form a single unit, is called sarcomere. You don't need to know more details about sarcomere. This is just for your information. Okay, now this is how the nervous tissue carries out action into the muscles and into the glands. Okay, now we will talk a little bit about voluntary and involuntary muscles. So muscles can be, as you have seen this already last year in your last year's class, that muscles can be voluntary or they can be involuntary. The voluntary muscles are skeletal muscles, And involuntary muscles are heart muscles, that is cardiac muscle, or smooth muscle. They lie in blood vessels and gastrointestinal tract. So these are the examples of skeletal muscles, like our arm, forearm, leg muscle, thigh muscles, and also the muscles of the diaphragm, whereas involuntary muscles are heart muscle, bladder, gastrointestinal tract, or respiratory airways muscle, and the muscles inside the blood vessels, and the muscles that are there in our internal structures, internal organs like kidneys. So voluntary and involuntary muscles. Now let us briefly have a look at voluntary and involuntary actions that are carried out by our body. Now voluntary actions are mediated predominantly by somatic nervous system. Remember, there are somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system deals with the external environment. The autonomic nervous system deals with the internal environment of the body. So involuntary actions are controlled predominantly by autonomic nervous system. Now voluntary actions are speedy and they involve potent contractions, strong contractions. Involuntary actions are slow, rhythmic, and sluggish. Sluggish is slow. Okay. This voluntary actions need high energy. Involuntary actions are low energy actions. Voluntary muscles like our arm and leg muscles, they get tired. They need frequent rest. Whereas heart, lung, blood vessel, gastrointestinal tract muscles, involuntary muscles, they do not get tired. They work continuously. Remember, imagine if our heart muscles get tired, we will die. They have to keep contracting from birth. Even before birth, they contract. When the baby is inside mother's womb, the heart muscles contract. They keep contracting till the person dies. Okay, so they don't get tired. They work continuously. Involuntary actions. And voluntary muscles are under the control of our will. Okay, we control them as per our will. Involuntary contractions or muscles are not controlled by our will. Voluntary actions involve, and they are involved in movement of parts of the body and body's locomotion. Involuntary control involves internal motions of the organs. They assist in digestion and also passage of fluids and food into the gastrointestinal tract. So that's involuntary action. Examples of voluntary actions are diaphragm, moving for respiration, pharynx, abdominal wall, tongue, middle ear muscles, and muscles under the skin. Involuntary muscles and their actions are gland ducts, blood vessel muscles, urogenital tract muscles, gastrointestinal tract, respiratory tract, heart muscles. These are involuntary muscles. Okay, so this is end of this section. The next section is the control and coordination in the plants. And remember, this is an important section as well, and I will take this section as a part 3. Otherwise, this will become a very long section. Okay, so I'll see you in part 3. If you haven't watched part 1, it's there on the channel, so you can go and check it on the channel. I'll see you in part 3 soon.